So welcome to today's episode of What Financial Services Firms Need to Know About Competing Digital First World, hosted by Navvai Shift. I'm Damari, and we also have Josh hosting. So I'm thrilled to be joined by an incredible influential leader in venture capital and inclusive investments, Eric Collins, founder of Impact X Capital. How you doing, Eric?
I'm good, Damari. How are you?
All is well.
Good. Perfect. You, Joshua, everything's good?
Everything is well. Very, very, very pleased with today's call.
You sent me some very difficult questions, so I look forward to how this is going to go.
No, we're definitely excited to dive in for sure. So before we dive into the world of AI, automation, inclusive investment, what's something that you recently read or watched or experienced that's inspired you?
You know, I have been watching on Netflix. There's a television show that was in the United States for years. It's been off the air for years called Mad Men. And I have been watching something, and it's made me madder and madder and madder every time I watch it. Maybe that's why they call it Mad Men. But I'm watching the story about an advertising agency which is helping the people of the United States to actually consume products, all sorts of products that we know very, very well, many of which had some of their origins then, or they were going through a transition, everything from women's stockings straight through to cigarettes, all the way through to Cool Whip. And so I've been watching some of these shows, and the thing which remains constant is in these organizations, there are these guys, white men, who have been in this position of helping to structure America's taste, helping to structure the office space in which they exist, the family relationships that they have, the inter-office relationships. And Black characters exist as background, because in their lives, I've never thought of myself as background, but in their lives, these are background items that sort of the same thing as, wallpaper and cars are the people who are also always servicing you. And I'm sort of like interested in, and that's why I'm getting madder and madder, because it's never how I viewed myself, as in service of a group of people who actually believe that that's the way that the world should be, and only through fighting and only through sort of being made extremely aware and then uncomfortable and then persuaded that that it's for their own good to change things. Do they actually even consider? Does it even occur to them? So that's what I've been getting mad about recently.
That's super insightful.
I'd like to give it a watch.
Yeah.
We don't want more of these shows made. We want different shows made. I should be watching Supercell or something like that, but no.
Supercell is a good watch.
Yeah.
I feel like you promoted that show, but yeah, no, we'll add it to the playlist. Eric, in relation to AI, we know it's fundamentally changing how we think about investment and risk. Given your experience with AI-driven companies, including selling AI startups to Microsoft and Methodic, how do you see AI transforming the way venture capital firms identify and support startups?
Let's divide AI into three different sort of categories of impact. One is in terms of investments themselves. So if we think about where the largest investment checks are being written these days from investors like us. So we're a venture capital firm, meaning that we want to be on the very high risk side of things. We want to look to things that are not known today, but 10 years time are going to be brand and household names. All those companies in the United States that have the names like Facebook, or ones that have the names like Netflix, or the ones that have the names like Google, they all started with venture capital. So venture capital, and they weren't known before people started investing in them and backing them, and then they grew into behemoths. So that's the kind of world that I exist in. Today, artificial intelligence is one of the very large investment categories. And the checks that are being written, the valuations which are occurring, the step up in terms of valuation as between one round and another have been extreme. And they're really driving sort of the returns that are being seen in the venture capital market. So if you're getting a return on investment, generally it's coming from something like that organization, and because of a stepped up valuation. So that has really sort of started to skew and started to really weigh on venture capital. We don't know whether or not yet we're at a place where we're at a little bit of an inflection point or a bubble, because those valuations are so high that it's extremely hard for those organizations to exit and to then realize the values that are placed on them on paper, and that you are able to get that back in pounds and pence, dollars and cents, euros and euro cents. We don't know that yet. And we might have a market correction, which then does what happened in the buy now, pay later space, which happened in the challenger bank space, where there were great valuations and then those came down. But so we'll see what happens with AI. So in terms of where venture capital investing is going, that's one thing. On the opposite end is venture capital operations. How do venture capital companies do their work? So venture capital companies are responsible for having a thesis, finding a pipeline of companies, negotiating, getting those pipeline to become portfolio companies, managing those, and then exiting those to value for the underlying investors called limited partners. In the situation of operations, you're beginning to see the application of artificial intelligence in those sectors. Our organization, for instance, has been looking at how do we utilize artificial intelligence to help us with that full range? How do you research who's going to put money behind you so that you can invest in others? And how do you find out facts about them? Artificial intelligence can be helpful in terms of that kind of scraping of a lot of data and giving you some sort of answers. Does it help us to create pipeline? Does it help us to find who else is out there? Well, again, it's just large data sets and going out there and looking for words like underrepresented, or looking for words like creative project, or looking for names of past founders and seeing sort of what they're doing today. All of that can be done with artificial intelligence. So maybe there's some of that. So across our operational activities, there is some application of artificial intelligence. Some organizations are relying on it heavily, some very little, but it is an interesting dynamic that we're seeing accelerating. It's not as though it's going backward. It seems to be accelerating how far we can push artificial intelligence into our processes. So there's the investing, and now there are the processes. And then there's everything else in between. And we're seeing artificial intelligence so dominating the discourse that indeed, if you are not investing in organizations that have some sort of an AI component, whether an AI divided into things like large language models, natural language processing, computer vision, if those things are not present and you don't find organizations who are actually leveraging those, it's the same thing that you would find, say, a few years ago, of organizations that are not saying that they have a technology stack that is helping them to be competitively advantaged and also to be able to do their business at a lower cost. So from my perspective, those are three major areas in which you see AI. Will it transform completely and make the processes and the investing and then the exits much more effective? That's still to be seen.
No, definitely understood. And when would you say that any specific AI tools or platforms that you believe are game changers for venture capital?
Well, I'm not going to name any particular products because we haven't invested in any, so it's no benefit to me to do that. So but let me describe some of the things that they would do. If you all have a lot of administrative tasks. You were sitting here you're doing a podcast, and there used to be a time when you would have to do everything. You'd have to go out and hire somebody to do the music if you had some music at the front, and to do the title cards and everything else if you were going to show a visualization of the podcast. You'd have to hire an editor. Now a lot of that is available to you in these platforms that exist, and you're able to easily edit, you're able to include pictures, you're able to do whatever you want, right? And you can promote directly and take snippets for trailer purposes. It's the same thing that we're seeing in venture capital, that the process is a 70-year-old, 80-year-old process that was really pioneered in Silicon Valley. Over 70 years, there has to be some disruption that happens. What I'm seeing that is the most interesting sort of disruption are some of the tasks which would be considered specialist tasks, but are probably things that are not highly skilled tasks. So for instance, every time you have a investment that you're making, you have to bring it to an investment committee who then makes a decision about it. But the investment committee has to be informed from a standing start. They don't know anything about this company, and you've got to inform them to a way that they're not just informed, but excited. Not just excited, but they're excited beyond what they could be excited with some other, where they could allocate their money, the money of the venture capital fund elsewhere. So consolidating that information in a digestible format and then presenting it has always been done as a human activity, but is that necessarily something that has to be done with so much human touch? Humans are fallible insofar as they have to sleep and they have to eat, and sometimes they want to enjoy themselves. So you can't just force them forever to be sitting looking at their screens and just going through and doing desk research, consolidating notes that are taken in due diligence, looking at spreadsheets that have been sent in a data room, all of that sort of thing. And there are possible ways to actually get rid of some of those critical, but many of us would say more mundane tasks, and then put them elsewhere. And that's how artificial intelligence is one of those tools. And there are a bunch of tools that are doing that. That's why I answer it, Damari, that way, because there are a bunch of tools that are doing that. And anyone can go on the internet and find them. But again, I'm not going to be recommending any of them because they don't pay me, and they don't pay impact tax.
In your opinion, how can financial firms balance automation with the human touch to maintain strong relationships?
That's a good question. You know, are you all believers? I used to work for a health tech company that was also in the that used artificial intelligence. Do you all believe that doctors are necessary for every sort of medical procedure that you have? It's not necessarily, I mean, anyone in the medical profession, meaning doctor, nurse practitioner, nurse, whomever, technician. Do you actually believe that there's something about the human touch with respect to your health that is absolutely necessary?
To some context, yeah, definitely.
I would agree, yeah.
So you don't want to be going into the operating room and sort of there be a robot who sits there and sort of slices you open, looks at you, does it, and and so even though the robot never goes on vacation, all they want to do is get it right. They never had a fight with their spouse the night before. The kids didn't stay up all night. They didn't go to a party and drink. Even though all of that is something that happens to the human, when we're talking about the automation, you would say, I still want some human intervention. And why do you want that human intervention?
For me, I think it's more or less conditioning how it has been when I do go to the doctor over the period of years of my life. It's like if I didn't have that, something in the back of my mind, it would cause some kind of uncertainty. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
And I think it's also that emotion as well. I think when you speak to doctors, you can kind of present that emotion to them. But talking to a robot and AI, it's a completely different story. They can't take that emotion into account. So I think that does make a difference.
It's like when you call into the bank and you can't reach anybody, right? And you're trying to get an answer. You call into your utility provider. It's like you just go into this endless circle. Okay. Now, I want to ask you another question. I'm sorry that I'm sort of hijacking your conversation, but I want to go to plane travel. You all travel? You're sophisticated men of the world, so you travel.
Yeah.
Would you go on an airplane that did not have automatic pilot? An automatic pilot is, here we are on an airplane, and there is actually an automation based on radar, sensors, and other sorts of things, and sort of attachment to all the systems of the plane, supposedly, as well as weather conditions and other sorts of things. And so real-time evaluation of what's going on, who are actually flying most of the time, the flights that you're taking. Would you fly on a plane that does not have automation, i.e. autopilot, and being used frequently?
No. And I think due to the fact that, imagine, say you're based, you're in America, you live in America, you're from America, traveling to America is probably a 9 to 10 hour flight. Trusting someone for a whole 10 hours, I haven't got that much confidence in that.
I mean, think about how much, I'm distracted during the day, and I'm sort of getting up and I'm getting some water and that sort of thing, just staring straight in front of you at the horizon, and then sort of taking in all this information with some co-pilot or something. So for me, automation should be something which is an enabler, and it is something which enhances our senses. It enhances our cognition. So for me, I actually like automation. I'm like the only person I ever talked to who says that when I go into the operating room, I'm worried that my person, had a bad commute, and therefore is focusing on that bad commute as opposed to sort of me on the table, or they might get distracted because I have to sneeze. It's like, no, well, these are all human things. They're human. That's just the condition of humanity. And I'm just like, well, so I love the idea of a little bit more and a little bit more, and then a lot more going on to the automation side of things. It's a personal opinion. So I am very excited by automation and artificial intelligence. I'm extremely, extremely bullish on the category.
I appreciate the context you gave us and that analogy you've used is, I would say that's so super insightful, because it's just another way to think about automation as a whole.
And I guess it's about reducing the human error as well. And human error is a real thing. And I think we've got to take that into account.
So whenever you, okay, well, I'm going to go back to air travel. And I love well, I don't love flying, but I do like air travel. I like the ways that it can get me. But don't you often hear at the end of it, after we've heard of one of these tragedies that occurs, human error?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, ugh. And so you say to yourself, and again, the humans are the people who have actually produced all these breakthroughs with assistance from computers and other sorts of things, because we've been using technology forever and ever, and teams and other sorts of things. Teams meaning groups of people as opposed to teams of technology. And I am very, very interested in how we can, in some situations, really absorb human error, and then other ways we can identify it as being the problem. Malpractice insurance is all about human error, right? Generally, that's what it's about, human error, and the judgment that is being made, which is an incorrect judgment and having adverse effects upon me and or the people I love or my friend, you know, whomever. So there. I'll leave it. I'll stop with that. I'll stop.
Super
You all never go to the doctor and never go on a plane. See, this is what I've done.
No, it's super insightful, Eric. I know we definitely can tell, we can sense that your energy is so high when it comes to automation and AI. But again, also in your opinion, what would you say are some of the pitfalls, or what would be one pitfall of AI?
Can I? So the funny thing is, with artificial intelligence, and this is something I learned in the various companies. So I've run 4 different companies in the C-suite. I've either been chief operating officer, I've either been managing director, or I've been like chief revenue officer of a bunch of companies, all of which I've been fortunate enough to have them to be sold to American public companies, and all of which had at their basis artificial intelligence. The interesting thing about all of them is that the thing that makes all the difference is how well the data is captured and how well the data is marked, and how full and fair is the data set from which information and inference is being drawn. That's the big problem. That bad information in, like, so for instance, if we look at the internet mainly is based on middle-class white Americans. That's sort of the majority of the data which has existed in the internet. And therefore, the majority of feedback associated with any type of query is going to be skewed in that direction. Sometimes it doesn't matter. If I'm asking the question of who was Maya Angelou, then, you know, fine, I think we can get that information, and it'll be, and we can rely upon it. If it is saying what is the treatment that we should utilize for hypertension, or how frequently should you get a prostate exam as a Black man, given we know the prevalence of prostate cancer, the early onset often, and often the virulent formula that it takes in young Black bodies, that is if we get the information wrong, then the consequences can be dire. And the way we might get it wrong is because the data doesn't exist in the data set that's actually being queried, or the data has been marked incorrectly, or not as thoroughly as it could be in order to be taking care of variance and that type of thing. So taking into account variance and that sort of thing. So from my opinion, that's the biggest challenge. Can we rely upon the data? And then with artificial intelligence as an application of data, the other thing is, as my CTO of ImpactX, so ImpactX, even though we're an investment firm, we have a CTO who is very much responsible for helping us think about things like how much of an investment should we make in artificial intelligence, both within our portfolio as well as in our operating systems. The funny thing is, the person said, look, you should think about artificial intelligence as it currently exists as a bad intern. Not a good intern, but a bad intern. So give them assignment. If you have a bad intern, they will return something to you and you have to edit it substantially. And he would say that based on the kind of ghosts that you find in the system, the idea that artificial intelligence will give you an answer even if it doesn't know, so that the question of reliance upon some of that information, not all of it, but some of it, could actually, again, be somewhat detrimental. So depending upon how consequential is the outcome of poor information would be, the more that you're going to actually then have to do your quality control, quality assurance, review, analysis of what you're actually receiving, and not to be able to rely upon it whole cloth. That's, I think, the chief downfall. It does add a level of scrutiny that you might not use for your own work if you're producing it yourself, but saying that it's scraped from someplace and then presented to you as a fait accompli, as if that is actual fact, is probably an oversimplification of what you're getting. It is, at sometimes, it might be more like a good and pretty well-informed opinion.
That's definitely valid. And obviously, in regards to Impact X, where you have a strong focus on AI governance and ethical investments, what role would you say AI plays in reducing bias within their investment decisions?
Well, see, for us, and this goes back to that other question, Damari, that you asked. Well, no, Joshua, I think, asked this question. But think about it. If what we're saying is that the data which is existing in large language models is data which is already skewed and demographically not very representative, and the investing that Impact X is doing is based on looking at sort of differentiated deal flow, and often that deal flow is based on underrepresented people, because we find that that's where differentiation happens. It is by definition almost that information about them is not necessarily included in the robust way as it could in that data which is being used, which we might rely upon. So we have to be a bit skeptical and feel a little bit dubious about what it is that we're finding when we just sort of go and do a general search, which is why we then have to supplement with other things. And that would be networks of people. That's where we would have to rely upon communication and back channel based on prior relationships. That's what we would actually do. So although we do use a bit of, and I would not say a lot, and I don't certainly think that we're optimized, and we're certainly not one of those organizations that has actually made that our focus, like AI first. We're not that kind of an organization. We do have methods by which we are able to, and sometimes they're time consuming, but to be able to get happy and to be able to get content with the information based on putting on top of it some other layers of control.
And when you spoke in regards to time consuming, a lot of people like to mitigate the time, but I think certain tasks that have to be time consuming to make sure you make the right decisions for your company.
Oh, absolutely. Don't you find? So look, you all sent me in advance of this conversation, although we don't seem to have been using all those questions, and you were even more interesting questions. But you had to do a lot of time to structure this conversation. It's not just the scheduling of it and then getting up and making sure you look good. You had to actually put in the work. I mean, the work is just necessary. It is time consuming in order for it to appear effortless, and for you all to have so much fluidity. It takes time for you all to develop a relationship such that you can do this without necessarily running all over each other or being somewhat concerned as to what is he going to say versus what I'm going to say. All of that without then it being a rehearsal beforehand. But that you've invested a great deal, and in my opinion, that you cannot shortchange the investments, and I would not want to undervalue that preparation and but for us, it's review and that evaluation of what it is that we're seeing. I mean, we're in a business where we are meeting a company for the first time. Often we have weeks to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to put millions behind them. People, I mean, you've heard all the tales about people who have lied about sort of the businesses they're in, so the amount of revenue that they're making, the traction in the market. And some people don't lie. It's just, entrepreneurs like everybody else spin. I mean, if you're dating, you spin as you got what you got, but you better spin it as well as possible, because someone might like it a bit more if they thought a little bit more highly of you. And at least then you have an opportunity to get that, to decide whether or not you're not disqualified off the bat. So let's put it that way. And so I think likewise, we find ourselves having to really interrogate the information that we receive, because facts, these are not necessarily facts. This is an interpretation often by an interested party who really wants to get money and really wants to impress me, really wants to impress Impact X. So, and we have a very short time to decide whether or not they're the person who is actually the second coming of Christ, or whether or not they have, gotten as far as they've gotten by flattery and foolery, but not necessarily by what we think of as the hard work and the real grit and ground game, which is necessary to really have a scalable company that is future-proofed.
In terms of investing, some founders, they face significant structural barriers in terms of accessing, capital. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that startup founders face?
So all the biggest challenge for every startup founder is going to be money, and then it's going to be time and talent. I'm going to put on top of this, for founders who are underrepresented, people who would fall into our differentiated deal flow sort of definition. The other thing that they have, I'm going to take a subset. I'm going to take Black people. So Black Britons, 1 in 2 young people today who are children are living below the poverty line. So the first thing that we have as a problem is there's no money in the system, the family system, for starting a business. And most businesses that are venture backed, the first amount of capital you get is from yourself in terms of savings and other sorts of things. But if you're poor, you probably don't have that much savings. You probably are supporting other members of your family, et cetera. The people, if you're poor, generally the people around you are also impoverished in some way. There's some who have more, some who have less, but generally we don't have a lot of extra resource to then put into a speculation called a high risk potential growth business, fast growth business. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. If you look so that's systemic, but it's not as though these people who are Black people demographically are less intelligent, less hardworking, have worse ideas or anything else like that. There is something systemic that makes them, where 1 in 5 white children are below the poverty line, 1 in 2 Black children are below the poverty line. There's something there. So that can be a systemic issue that we can talk about. The second systemic issue is that outside of your own money and sort of those people who are close to you, the second biggest source of money for people who are starting and running businesses are banks and bank loans. Well, think about that. In the UK, if you have the same type of credit, you have the same type of tenure of your business, you're running the same type of business with the same turnover. If you are Black and you're dealing with a high street bank, you are 4 times less likely to get a loan for your business. So there's something else. Again, everything is the same. The thing which differs is the demographic details of the person who's applying for the loan. So that's the thing. So if you're looking for money, I don't have any money, the bank won't give me any money. And then you come to venture capital. Venture capital, which is highly speculative, less than 1% of all capital that is invested in other businesses comes from venture capital. So it's a very small amount of money in the first place. These other categories have much more money than venture does. But then in venture, if you look at those numbers, less than 2% of venture funding goes to women, and that's mainly white women, less than, about 2.6%, 0.24% goes to Black people of all venture capital, and then Black women it's 0.002%. So
easy.
So the question is, and the issue is, isn't that terrible?
Yeah.
So that's another systemic issue. So the thing that is happening, and we don't discuss, the way that we can discuss this is, again, if we look at those individuals, and this has been done time and time again, organizations like Spark, which look at bias in terms of decision making, they're out of, Spark is SPARQ, if anyone's interested in it. And they're out of Stanford University, and Jennifer Eberhardt runs that group as out of Stanford. So they have shown that there's bias in many of these spaces, and the bias can be measured by doing side-by-side testing. And all you do is change sort of the demographic details, but you keep everything else the same. So what we're finding is, even in venture capital, the most risky place, people are not taking risk on the most risky people. So again, that's where some of the systemic issues happen. It's not to say how to solve those problems, but it's to say that there's systemic issues all along the way. The most insidious one is not the venture capital one. That's terrible. It's not necessarily the banking one. It's a poverty one. That's the most insidious because it affects everything else.
I'm blown away. That's
ridiculous. But a quick question, Eric. So obviously in the last 20 years, have you seen any movement or progress to potentially improve these stats on a wider scale?
The thing I have found, Demario, that I found most encouraging, I think I found most encouraging that there is less of a hat in hand, beggar bowl to power approach that's being taken by entrepreneurs and young innovators. There is much more of, look, I get it. I get that these are the dynamics. I can fight those dynamics on a day-to-day basis, but what I'm instead going to do is I'm going to find like-minded people, sort of how ImpactX got started, and I'm going to work with those individuals. So, for instance, if you look at ImpactX, when we did our first fund back in 2018, we raised all of our money from Black Britons, Black French, Black Americans. And that was our first fund, to invest in this idea that if you invest in differentiated deal flow, you can get venture scale returns and make lots and lots of money, plus create a lot of jobs. The second fund that we did was actually based on institutional money. So the track record we proved then let us get Bank of America, Guys and St. Thomas's, Health Foundation and Endowment Allocation, the Visa Foundation. It helped us to get Illumin Capital, Atomica, a bunch of other organizations to come invest with us. So I've seen the ability to take track record, identify the group of individuals and companies that are interested in moving the world in a similar way and have similar goals. The tools that we have now to actually bring those people together, social media and the internet, which weren't available in the same way they were 20 years ago, is making all of that much easier. And then you're able to hear these stories because we have podcasts like yours, right? So your podcast is seeking to disseminate that information to an audience. And so then you have this sort of information that people will then know, well, there's ImpactX, and ImpactX is I just named some of our investors. That's the sort of thing. We've just talked through one of the strategies. And so again, working with like-minded people is something that has become more and more prevalent, and the ability to get like-minded people, not that are just in my neighborhood, but that are broadly around the world, and to be able to identify them and locate them relatively quickly, and to be connected with them for casual and other sorts of reasons. You've been doing Instagram. I'm not sure you've done this. Instagram sort of drops of information like this, and people have heard about you, and then they become part of your network, and you can call upon them for other reasons. So I think all of these things are ways in which things have improved over the 20 years.
Impressive. Eric, I feel like you have a lot of stories in the vault. Can you share a success story of a startup that thrived due to ImpactX's inclusive investment approach?
Oh, I wish I could take credit, as the ImpactX could take credit for their success. But there are two that I would tell you about. One is unexpected. There's an organization called Unique, which is and this guy, Roy Akupe, who lives in Maryland and is of Nigerian background, started a company because he had a series of graphic novels about a universe of superheroes and other sort of extraordinary people. So he had a thing called the Unique Universe, YOUNEEK. And so that Unique Universe, we saw him doing a Kickstarter campaign and decided we were going to invest. So we could bring one of these or more of these to the market. And so we chose a story called Iyanu, IYANU, about a young girl who comes out of an amnesia and discovers that she has these superpowers that sort of rival the powers of the elders, but she doesn't know where they came from. And so she and her friends go about not only helping in Yoruba land, which is where they live, which is some sort of, it's a sort of an amalgamation of a lot of African lore into a single place called Yoruba land, that indeed this young girl and her friends, solve all sorts of problems and all sorts of mysteries as they try and reconstruct what happened to her memory. We actually backed that deal, again, from a Kickstarter campaign, and that program, working with our head of our thing called ImpactX Studios, her name is Erica Motley. Eric has been able to work with Roy in order to be able to get the graphic novels actually reprinted by the third biggest graphic novel publisher in the world after Marvel and DC Comics, and that third one is Dark Horse. She was able to work with Lion Forge, which is a Oscar-winning animation company, one of the only Black ones in the world, and is out of the United States, get them to come on board to do the animation for a series. That series was sold to HBO and to Cartoon Network. It was also sold to ITV as well as Mnet in Africa. So we are actually, and the show is launching, 2 seasons of it, plus 2 movies are launching in April of this year. So April 2025. So April 5th, in fact, is the premiere date in the United States. So that is an example of bringing something that was a Kickstarter campaign all the way through to major distribution and major and the major media market in the world, the United States, and then now also Europe, Africa, and the UK. So we're very pleased with that project. And that one has, for return metrics, that one has the highest return metrics in our portfolio. And then here in the UK, we have Marshmallow, which is an insurtech company that helps expats and people who are immigrants into the UK to actually get affordable car insurance. That organization started by the identical twins, Oliver and Alexander Kent Brahim, and their sister's actually also involved in the company. That organization has been going gangbusters. When we invested, they were, and this is probably 4 years ago, they were at a 30 million pre-money valuation. 18 months later, they're at 1.2 billion. They are, and they've gone from, in 2023, they had 180 million in revenue, something like that. And the expectations is more than doubled for 2024, the year that just ended. So this is an organization, and they have hundreds of employees, and 50% are women, and 50% and 20% are people of color in key roles. And this is a fast growth technology company. And it was named by Dealroom.io as one of the 120 companies in Europe and the UK that's likely to go public in 2025. So that's an organization there, and that's a Black company too. These are the sorts of organizations that ImpactX has been able to partner with and back. None of those, we've had more impact on Ianu that we've had, and Unique, than we've had on Marshmallow, but we work with both of those organizations in the ways that they need and the ways that we can to achieve their full potential.
This is absolutely amazing. So how would you say traditional financial institutions can learn from ImpactX model to foster more diversity within their portfolio?
It's a funny, and I take a beat because I don't want to be glib about this, but I'm also just don't want to say that they can just follow our playbook. You asked the question, what are the systemic problems that exist in these various companies and even in traditional financial organizations, and even challenger banks and others are built with people who have so much internal bias that it makes it very hard to retrofit those organizations to be better than their people are, and to think differently than their people think. Now, sometimes if you have someone at the top of the organization, say at JP Morgan with Jamie Dimon, or you have someone at the top of the organization like Alexander and Oliver Ken Brahim, that at Marshmallow, or you have, say Rob Pierre at Jellyfish, another UK successful Black company, then maybe that's something which changes the people below them, even though they have a very diverse staff. But what I note is that these organizations are not built for purpose. Yeah. They are built for what they actually do, and part of that is the exclusion and the overlooking and the underfinancing. So I'm not very confident in those organizations wanting to remake themselves. You must have heard from people in the world that you can't change somebody. They have to make a choice to change. So I think in many of these cases, these organizations will not make a choice to change unless forced to change because of pain, agony, or some other reason. And I don't see them facing a lot of pain and agony at the moment. A little bit of discomfort, but not pain and agony. So I'm not sure if they're going to go for the radical surgery that they need. So I don't have a great answer to that one. I wish I did, except to start other organizations and then let those other organizations demonstrate how fantastically working with different groups of people and getting returns from them, and you're missing out if you haven't done this. And in fact, on some of the best returns. So maybe that's the way to do it. But it is not my intention to spend a lot of time trying to change organizations that are dinosaurs and I think should die.
Okay, yeah. Eric, I wanted to ask, what's one misconception financial firms have about, inclusive investments?
One of the, interestingly, I'm going to give you an example. I think that various financial firms misconstrue the size of the diverse marketplace. So for instance, if you were a person, and there are a lot of people who are out there, maybe some who will be listening to this, who start various food delivery services, makeup, beauty brands, stocking, hosiery brands, that are based on a Black consumer population as their primary population that they're seeking to pursue. Those organizations are often underestimated in terms of the value of the market and what is the total addressable market for those goods, because those are not necessarily that's not a market about which they know. They don't track it. They don't have analysts who are out there looking at it. So those are some of the ways in which I think people underestimate. And what I would say they purposely underestimate, because it's not as though we've been talking about the internet and other sorts of things and data being available. And, so the data is there. If they don't wish to, and they are basing this on their own prejudgments or prejudices, that there is not enough to create a organization like Pat McGrath. So Pat McGrath, a Birmingham young woman who is a makeup artist, and that she has many millions valued company of makeup, and one of the most highly sought after and luxurious makeups in the world, that wouldn't exist because Black women don't buy in that particular way, or there are not enough Black women around the world to buy. Of course, Pat McGrath, everyone wears her makeup. Fenty, everyone wears the makeup. But there are a number of people who actually believe, based on their own prejudices, that they can judge how effective or ineffective something is going to be, even with a very good business plan and evidence being drawn to that business plan. I think that's one of the things. So that those blinders will have this limitation. What do you think?
I think there are definitely, as you said, blinders and limitations. I think, as you said in before as well, in regards to, I'm trying the best way to word it, but I think in regards to how people have their culture and they have their set layout of what their thoughts are, in terms of even in regards to companies as well, like, as you said, dinosaurs, and they're actually used to that sort of mindset. So I think that kind of stems and keeps pushing on kind of down the line, in my opinion.
Did you all know that term? Do people use that in your circles, lived experience?
Which term, sorry?
Lived experience.
Oh, lived experience.
So think about it. So we're generally talking about lived experience for people who are underrepresented. It's like we need to be able to sort of hear about their lived experience or understand more of their lived experience. Think about the lived experience of most of these folks. And especially if we look at the Color of Power study that was done published back in 2018, where the lived experience, if you are a prime minister in the UK, I think 100% of them have gone to Cambridge or Oxford. I mean, it's some ridiculous number, have gone to 2 universities, and of those 2 universities, as representative of the entire island called the UK and Northern Ireland, that's a very small percent. But everyone comes from that particular, so their learned experience is in a very small and narrow space. And even if they've come from, a few people have come from some other places and come into that cauldron called Oxford and Cambridge, their learned experience there and then after take on a turn. And so the question is, sort of the learned experience of these folk, we'd expect nothing less than what we actually get, and somewhat limitation in terms of their worldview.
Yeah, no, I definitely do agree with that. That's a crazy stat, but the majority of them even went to 2 universities. That's, to be fair, I'm not surprised. And that's why a lot of people are very upset with how our government is structured, but that's a completely different conversation.
We can have that one next, but no, yeah.
But just to kind of touch on staying competitive in a digital first economy as well. So as we know, financial services are rapidly evolving. From your experience in investing in over 42 companies, what's your biggest technology shifts that firms need to prepare for in the next 5 years, would you say?
I do think the biggest shift, and can I shift this just a little bit? I think what we as individuals need to be prepared for is that artificial intelligence will take away some of what it is that we have been doing up until now. Do we really need, I have people who make marketing materials for me who use artificial intelligence from beginning to end, including the personalities that are presenting the information. Do we actually need people who are doing some of that? Do we need people who are actually writing code, who are engineers? Do we actually, can artificial intelligence create codes? Now, we might need some quality control engineers, and we might need people to actually confirm, just like we do in the investment process, but do we really need the same amount of people doing the same types of things? Do we really need all those doctors doing diagnostics when, if we could feed this into a machine that actually recognized the traits for the cough that is a COVID cough versus a pneumonia cough versus a tuberculosis cough, wouldn't that be, a bit better? A bunch of different things. We have one company that's using not artificial intelligence, but we could use artificial intelligence. Well, it's because it's using computer vision, but it's trying to get, in terms of fertility, to increase the rate at which for artificial insemination, IVR, is actually done. So this in vitro fertilization is actually done by choosing, based on the dynamics of the sperm, the right sperm to then connect to the right egg, so that we can actually get the most healthy children and do it right the first time, as opposed to have all of these failed attempts. So, if all of those things are happening, what happens to that technician who's generally been looking at a microscope and working with a pipette, if it can be done electronically and more accurately? If it can be, and based on millions of examples of healthy sperm, views of what a healthy sperm looks like and sort of the resulting children from it, blah, blah, blah. So all of that sort of makes me think, so what are the kinds of future-proofed jobs, and what are the kind of future-resistant jobs that are available, and roles that we should be taking? And therefore, what is the training that all of us should be undertaking at a young age, and as we continue to be relevant in the future? I think about that sort of thing. So instead of what the businesses need to do, I think about what the individuals need to do. Do you really need a first-year associate in a law firm or a audit firm to do something which could be done by artificial intelligence much more quickly, much more cheaply, and sometimes more accurately, especially if you're talking about comparing documents, for instance?
Yeah,
that's it. I think that's an example.
I certainly feel that with those with the people that are learning or don't know too much about AI. Of course, yes, we can rely on AI to do quite a lot, but I think what they need to be doing is learning how to oversee and understanding the tools, so that they can actually manage. So it's not necessarily, of course, it's not from the point of view where they're going to lose their job, but they should learn that skill to manage. That's where I think they'll become a lot more valuable to the marketplace in the near future.
Can I give you another example in the airline industry?
Let's do it.
So
3 for 3.
A pilot is easier to replace than a flight attendant. So if you think about what the pilot does, and the pilot, again, having automatic pilot, having had it for decades and decades and decades, the ability to input the information, to determine the flight plan, to do all sorts, which altitudes to fly at, which speed to fly at to make the flight comfortable, as well as to save fuel, all that stuff can be determined and then plugged in. And there are very few discretionary choices that the pilot makes. However, back there, whether it be in first, business, or economy, there are a lot of decisions to be made in terms of where luggage goes, creating alternatives when someone's actually allergic to the peanuts. It's a bunch of different things that are going on back there amongst the handling of people. Now, those are not the highest paid jobs, right? The highest paid job is the pilot. The people who are the flight attendants and those sort of service jobs, whether it be plumber or something else, which is sort of a tangible and having to use that set of skills, and having to have the thing like your tangible digits in order to be able to do something. Maybe robots will actually be able to replace that. But I think artificial intelligence replaces a pilot before a robot replaces a flight attendant. And so that's my controversial statement for the day, because I think that skill is much harder. The plumber is much harder to do than the person who's giving you your mortgage, who's doing the analysis to give you your mortgage. That job is just a bunch of numbers and then a rationale as to why that can be sent through artificial intelligence to some ultimate decision maker somewhere. You don't need a loan officer for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's more like the hands-on task in general. As plumbers, people who are working service-based, ideally directly working with customers, that can't be replaced. But I definitely agree with you on that aspect for sure.
My CTO is constantly arguing with me about this. He's constantly saying, Eric, the things that are going to happen are those jobs that are going to stay. And the jobs that we think of as being particularly middle-class jobs and ones that allow you to live in Northwest London and allow you to have a vacation home in Cornwall, those are the jobs that go away.
Eric, I've really been itching to ask you this question, but Impact X has recently partnered with Microsoft. Is that right?
We did. That was a few years back. Yep.
Oh, it was a few years back. Okay, and that was to launch a venture studio. Is that right?
Correct.
What role do partnerships play in scaling, innovative financial solutions?
And that one was a particular relationship because we were focusing on how do we get more women and people of color involved in solving the problems of sustainability. And this was for the water industry in the UK. As we know with Thames and other, if you live southeast like I do, the challenges that exist around contamination, overflow, raw sewage being overflowing into, pristine waterways, or not pristine waterways, but sort of, and discharge from storms and that kind of thing. Mixing of gray water and fresh water it's just a nightmare. And so who can help us to solve some of those problems? And so we partnered with Microsoft and the water industry here in the UK to help come up with some innovation around that, and made a few investments into our own portfolio based on the work that we were actually doing there. Partnerships like that are extremely important. Organizations like Microsoft have got, they're big, right? They're 250,000 employees, and then 250,000 contractors in addition. They are involved in almost every company and every government in the Western world. And those organizations are partners. They have all that sort of information running through, and they're improving their products as well as feeding their artificial intelligence engines based on that. Having those partnerships and having access based on the resources that organization has, it probably also has 100 billion of cash on its balance sheet, means that we are able to fight in a weight class much higher than the one that we can actually fight in ourselves. So we find it very useful, as long as what we're talking about is a true partnership. Some of these partnerships are, they wouldn't feel, if you were to, pull back the curtains a little bit, you would say that doesn't feel like a partnership. Working with Microsoft was a partnership. They provide as much as they get. They provide probably even much more than they actually receive. So I think some of those are good. But again, it's how do you develop those partnerships, and then how do you make those partnerships actually work?
I did want to ask, in terms of like getting into small rooms, or creating these connections, and with high net worth individuals, like for our standpoint, Navvai, we've recently just started. What would be some advice that you would give to us to get into these small rooms? Or I won't say find another Eric Collins, because there's not another one, but how would you advise?
I would say you have to come forward with a value proposition and add value to those individuals, so it's within their self-interest to spend time with you. That's what it is. And then to leverage your set of relationships where you have actually shown and proven that value, and keep on using that to get you further and further along. If you do things well for one set of people, those people, no one wants to hide you away from their friends. They want their friends to also benefit. So that's how I found to be the most effective.
Eric, if you had one last sentence just to advise us, obviously given your past experience and your current experience, what would be one sentence to kind of give us?
That I would always be looking toward the future. I think certainly the past is a very good indicator of what could happen in the future, but I would like people to be sort of forward focused. What is it that we believe the world will look like in 5 to 10 years? If that is what the world will look like, what are the things which are most important, and which things are people going to actually want to pay for? And that's where I'd spend my time, always, on those types of things. And the reason I think it's important is I think there's no need to be obsolete. There's no reason to be sort of always catching up. in many ways, if I were talking about things like entertainment, many people would say, well, that's where a place where underrepresented people certainly do dominate, and that there are ways in which innovation from that group is always seen as important. And I would say that across the spectrum of sectors, including digital and technology, health, education, and well-being, there are other spaces where we also do the same. And I would have us to constantly be looking forward and saying, sort of, what can I bring forward that's going to not only be more future-oriented, but it's also going to make the world a better place. That's it.
No, perfect. Eric, it's been a very, very insightful conversation. We really appreciate your time today. For our viewers listening, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, always, we have our website, www.impactxcapital.com. We also spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So it's ImpactX Capital Partners, and then it's Eric D. Collins. So follow me there. We like to spend time on platforms that support us and not those that work against us. So those are the ones we're working with right now.
No, that's amazing. Eric, it's been an amazing time. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's great getting a chance to meet you. Good luck with everything.